Okay, so good morning everyone. My name's Mike Sharp. So I'm an economic statistician and microdata specialist working for the Census and Survey technical support team at the Pacific Community.
Michael, we can only see your hand.
How's that? So most of the work that I'm involved in at SPC is providing technical support for the Pacific Island countries to conduct census and nationally representative surveys. So that's the main focus of my intervention here. But just to start off with some background to population and housing census. So this is the foundation of statistical systems providing benchmarks of a country's population and housing stock, and it also provides a baseline for other statistical undertakings, so it forms a sampling frame. So censuses supply data to populate around 15% of the Pacific Sustainable Development Goal indicators, and in lieu of comprehensive population-based administrative systems in the Pacific region, the census is the fundamental denominator for all population-based indicators of the SDGs, and it accounts for around 45% of the Pacific indicators. So 45% of the 131 Pacific development indicators under the SDGs are populated through census. And further to this, data that are produced through census are used in planning and policy applications in areas ranging from gender, education and health, all the way through to infrastructure and food security planning. So data produced through census are also used in the preparation of population projections, and these are fundamental for social and economic planning purposes. Censuses count everyone. So traditional censuses, traditional challenges to the successful conduct of census continue to pose risk. So these challenges, surround non-response or undercounting people. And furthermore, technological advancement, while it also presents an opportunity, it also poses as a risk. So census undertakings are costly, and their under-resourcing sometimes results in poor census performance. So we estimate a funding gap of around $200 million in the Pacific region for the conduct of statistical collections under the remainder of the 2020 round of population and housing censuses, which puts the update to crucial population benchmarks at risk. So there's a big funding gap in the Pacific for the conduct of core national statistical collections, including census. And this means that censuses may be delayed or censuses may not be conducted, and thereby though people will fall outside of those social and economic planning mechanisms. So along with these traditional challenges and financing challenges, new challenges exist, such as COVID-19. Now these all highlight the need for further development of population-based statistical systems in the Pacific region. Objective 1 of the 10-year Pacific Statistics Strategy aims to ensure that Pacific Island countries and territories have technological and statistical capability to manage and implement core statistical collections, including greater utilisation and integration of key administrative databases. Significant achievement has been made in the development of administrative statistics, such as in education management information systems, civil registration and vital statistics systems, disability registers, trade databases, business registers and consumer price index databases. There is, however, a lot more work required to increase their coverage and also to further develop new systems. There's also a need to promote data sharing among government agencies and with development partners. The Pacific region has in place strong governance framework for statistics development, and many PICs have in place national strategies for the development of statistics. National statistics legislation is, however, often out of date and need of updating. The fourth meeting of the Pacific Statistics Methods Board identified that the future of census in the Pacific region should consider managing risk and supporting PICs to assess their readiness to pursue new technology. This timely series of webinars seeks to strengthen capacity in relation to the role of administrative databases in Pacific census programs, and it also aims to identify opportunities for the development of population-based statistical systems in the Pacific region. I wish you well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mike. And sir, apologies, colleagues, for that hitch with the technology. So just to give you a brief background to this project, this is a two-phase project that SPC is implementing in collaboration with Pacific Island countries. And the first phase of this project is to raise awareness on the opportunities and prerequisites for the use of registers and administrative data in census outputs, drawing on experiences of a wide range of countries around the world. We have organized 6 webinars and on this topic, and we are fortunate to have the contribution of a range of a highly experienced team of speakers who will be joining us from different parts of the world through the series. On to the first webinar today, we will be laying the background on international developments in census methods in recent years, and also looking at the review of the 2020 round to understand the future prospects and possibly where the statistical data collection methods looking into the future. The second webinar will seek to demonstrate the role of registers in meeting the data demands of the population and housing censuses. In the third webinar, we will focus on providing the details about key requirements on the utilization of registers for census statistics. And this webinar will lead into webinars 4 and 5, which will address approaches on how to achieve register-based census outputs when a population register is in place and when one is not in place. And then with the 6th webinar, we will have an open session with Pacific Island countries to discuss about their experiences in access and use of registers and administrative data for census outputs, as well as the challenges and opportunities in this regard. So today the participants on this call include officials from National Statistics Offices, Civil Registration Offices, and health departments and partners. Unfortunately, due to time limitations, we will not have an opportunity to do a round of introductions. We suggest to dive straight into the agenda, and we are sure that we will have another opportunity for all of us to engage through the Q&As and to get to know each other. So we will dive straight into the agenda of the day, and for this we will begin with a presentation by Mr. Ian Cope, who will provide a background to census approaches, developments in censuses in the recent years, and a summary of countries and how different methods that are in use. Ian is working closely with us on this project, and I'm sure he will go through an introduction of himself in the course of his presentation. So thank you, Ian. Please take the floor.
So you can see these slides. Okay, so one with a photo of me. Okay, so and then from 2015 to 2018, I was the director for the 2021 census, and also responsible for a project that we called the Admin Data Census, which was trying to use data already held by government to supplement and replace the census. I left the ONS in 2018. I'm now freelance contractor, and from 2018 till February of this year, I was a member of the Stats New Zealand's 2018 Census External Data Quality Assurance Panel. There was 8 members of that panel. I was the international census experts. So these are the key points that I'm going to cover in this presentation, and I'll summarise them at the end. So just so you kind of bear this in mind as we go through the presentation, there are a variety of methods for carrying out a census. There's quite a lot of regional variation in the methods that countries use. There's a move to greater use of registers and administrative data to both either supplement or replace the full field enumeration census approach. Particularly that's true within Europe, and it partly depends on the availability of high quality address, population and business registers and other registers. You can use administrative data to supplement a traditional census, so you don't have to go the full hog moving to a register-based census. You can still get benefits from starting to use such data. And then I'll flag up during this presentation how we're going to cover some of these points in more detail in later webinars. You probably know this, but I'll just recap it. Why do we conduct a census? I mean, it gives nationally consistent information for small areas and for small population groups, underpins policy making in health and education, etc. It's the benchmark or the base for population estimates and population projections. It's a unique source of information for small area and small population groups, and it's used widely by government and businesses and the voluntary sector to plan investment and service delivery, and then also to allocate money from central government to local areas. And these kind of factors apply across the world. And censuses typically collect information on the population and the housing units, the household and family structures, then kind of detailed characteristics of the people within households, so their education, their labour force status, maybe their religion, etc. As Michael said, census provides denominators for non-census statistics, such as birth and death rates. And in some countries, the census is also used as a sampling frame for other household surveys. Census taking is an international endeavour overseen by the UN, and the 2020 World Population and Housing Census Programme. UN is encouraging all nations to carry out a census at least every 10 years. And obviously to support that, the UN provides guidance and principles and recommendations for carrying out population and housing censuses, the latest version of which was published in 2017. So it has information on concepts, principles and methods. Of the 193 nations in the UN, for the last census round, only 6 did not conduct a census. So virtually the whole world conducts a census of one form or another. And this quote, I think, from the guidance, I think is quite important, that human capital is the most critical capital for contemporary society's well-being and progress. Understanding the people and their nature and their situations and characteristics is critical for the effective management and running of a country. Even back in 1853 in Brussels, the International Conference of Statisticians defined the essential features of a population and housing census. And the 5 of them, so individual enumeration, so that each person is counted separately. Simultaneity, so that the census count happens at one point in time. Universality, so that everybody within a country or within a region or territory is counted. People aren't missed out. That they provide small area data, and that censuses are carried out on a defined periodicity, typically 5-yearly or 10-yearly. UN guidance also recognises 5 different ways of carrying out census, and for those that may be a bit less familiar with this than others, I'll just spend a little bit of time on this. So the full enumeration was often called the traditional census, where everybody's counted and there's a field operation, and that's typically either self-completion, so people fill out the questionnaires on their own, either on paper or online, more modern times, or an interview-based approach where an enumerator goes to a household and collects the information either on paper or on a mobile device. Rolling census, that's only carried out in France. And in France, they enumerate 1/7 of the country every year, with parts of all large towns and cities covered every year. Different areas are selected, and then smaller communities every 7 years. And then the census results are a rolling average of those 7 years, which are produced like 3 years in advance. So they can, from this method, they can produce annual population estimates, and it spreads the cost of a census across the decade, but only France uses this method. Then there are combined methodologies. We combine registers and admin data plus a census, or registers and admin data plus surveys. And the surveys could be either established or ad hoc surveys. Base registers, these are typically important registers like the population register, address register, business register, alongside existing sample surveys. That might be the labour force survey, as in the Netherlands, or a fully registered base census, as is carried out in many of the Scandinavian countries, Denmark, Norway, Finland, for instance, where there's no collection of information from the public at all, and all of the information comes from registers held by the state. So there's quite different approaches that can be adopted legitimately. So this table shows the different types of approach. So from a full field enumeration only, the so-called traditional census, through to a fully registered based census. You can integrate admin data and a full field enumeration, and that's what the New Zealand census ended up with in 2018, partly because of their poor response issues. They had to make use of the data alongside a full field enumeration. You can have the base registers and existing sample surveys, or registers plus ad hoc sample surveys. So the Netherlands uses registers and existing sample surveys. Germany has a base register and runs ad hoc surveys at the time of the census. So the UNECE carried out a survey around the 2010 round. Of the 105 countries that responded to that survey, 85% carried out a full field enumeration. Within Europe, it was only 61% had a full field enumeration. In Oceania, it was 100%.
Sorry, Ian, let me interrupt you a little. I understand that the slides are not visible, and I'll share those across on email right away.
Okay, I can. Okay, I'll
Please do
stop.
proceed, because I think some participants can see the slides. We will share for those who cannot.
Yeah,
So
I'm not having any difficulty seeing the slides. They're on my screen, so it's working for me. I'm not sure about others.
Sorry, did you say you want me to carry on or not?
Yes, please do, and we will share them on email.
Okay. Maybe for future webinars we should share them in advance in case we have these problems. Okay, I will carry on then. So sorry for those that will have to catch up later. Within Europe, 10 countries carried out census that relied on administrative registers. So that's the area where there's greatest use of administrative registers and admin data. Looking at a map of the survey area, the 10 European countries using registered censuses, they all had small populations, they all had ID card systems in place and population registers. So these are countries like the Netherlands, Iceland, Sweden and Finland. Most large countries used a full census enumeration, and all of North and South America had full enumeration censuses. This is another way of looking at the data, this table. So 35 countries carried out traditional censuses, 9 countries had combined censuses, and they're listed there. Good Czech Republic, Spain, Germany, etc. 9 countries carried out register-based censuses, and just France had the rolling census. Here's another take on the data, and it's showing the kind of changes between 2000 and 2010 in the methods used covered by the UNECE survey. So more UNECE countries are using combined and registered methods in 2010 than was the case in 2000. And you can see that Austria went from a traditional census to a registered-based census, and we'll cover that in a later webinar. And we'll also talk about the Netherlands, Spain, Denmark, Finland, Norway and Germany in later webinars. And you can see from this table that they each have slightly different approaches to carrying out their censuses. In looking at enumeration methods for the traditional census, there's widespread use of face-to-face interviews in the 2010 round, even in the UNECE countries covered by the UNECE survey, and also a significant use of self-enumeration either on paper questionnaires or internet-based. So face-to-face interviews is still a widely used method. For countries with a combined method, most combined censuses obviously make extensive use of registers. But even in countries carrying out combined censuses, it's still common to use face-to-face interviews in the 2010 round. Plus use of self-enumeration both on paper and online. So there's a real mix. So Germany, the Netherlands and Spain are countries that we'll talk about a bit later on in later webinars. In the 13 countries used alternative methods in both the 2000 and 2010 rounds covered by the UNECE survey. But 18 countries used alternative methods for the first time in the 2010 round. So that's quite a significant change. So there's increasing use of these alternative methods, but the majority of countries still carry out a full enumeration census. And it's notable that countries with large populations all used full enumeration. This includes China and India, USA, Russia, Japan, etc., the UK, Canada, Australia. So there's quite a notable difference there. This table summarises the changes between the 2000, 2010 and 2020 census rounds. And what's interesting is that there's a continued increase use of register-based censuses for the 2020 round in the UNECE countries, and that together more countries are using register-based censuses or the combined census than the traditional census. That's the first time that that's happened within the UNECE area. Something I think that's worth noting is that the transition from one approach to another, it takes time. We'll cover that in some of the later webinars. Austria switched from a traditional census in 2000 to a full register-based census in 2011, but that's actually unusual and very fast. I'm going to talk a little bit now about traditional self-enumeration censuses and innovation, and start with interview-based census enumeration. So the early UK censuses in the early 1800s were interview-based, and they were carried out by local poor law officials and only counted head count information. The early New Zealand censuses also were interview-based, so the 1846 census of New Plymouth was carried out by inspectors of police, listed householders, also collected information on cultivation and livestock. And there were separate Maori censuses that listed Maori by principal tribe, sex and whether under and over 15. And Ethiopia, for their census in 2020, is carrying out an interview-based census, and they're employing 180,000 interviewed staff, each of whom will be issued with a tablet with maps and questionnaires. India census of 2011 was interview-based, and they employed 2.7 million field staff to interview the 1.2 billion people that were counted. And it's interesting that they had a two-phased approach. So in the first phase, they did a house listing exercise to essentially create an address register of all the properties, and then they asked questions about the dwellings and the households. And in the second phase, they then went back and asked 30 questions of individuals living in the dwellings. And this was an interview-based census. I'm just going to summarise now some major census innovations in the traditional census in UK, New Zealand, Canada and Australia over the last 30 years or so. In the UK, back in 1991, they held a traditional hand delivery, hand collection model. So people were hand delivered a paper questionnaire and it was hand collected. In 2001, postback was introduced, so people could post their questionnaires back through the post. The Canadian census in 2006 They developed an address register in Statistics Canada. They posted out paper forms to 80% of addresses, and they had an online census and post-back of the questionnaires. And the New Zealand census of 2006 introduced an online census for the first time. The USA census of 2010 had no online census, but they did introduce a post-back of paper questionnaires. The UK census in 2011 developed an address register, which enabled post-out of paper questionnaires and also an online census and questionnaire tracking. And there was also post-back still available. The Canadian census of 2011 was an online first approach with post-out of a letter with an online access code, which again went to about 80% of addresses. New Zealand census in 2013 was largely the same as in 2006, and the Canadian census of 2016 was largely the same as in 2011. The Australian census of 2016 was an online first approach. Again, they developed an address register. They posted out letters with access codes and achieved a 63% online response rate. And then the New Zealand census of 2018 was online first, again with a post-out of letters with access codes based around an address register. So one of the themes that's important here is that address registers actually underpin even traditional censuses. Just talk about combined censuses briefly. So there are various ways of combining sources of data as the UN guidance talks about. So there's a combination of a traditional census and register and admin data. That was the approach used in Spain in 2011 and in New Zealand in 2018. We'll cover those in webinar 5. Combination between registers, admin data and existing surveys. And the Netherlands system is like this, and we'll have a presentation of the Netherlands in the next webinar. Combination between registers, admin data and ad hoc surveys. And this is the German approach, which will be covered in webinar 5. And then combined censuses may be a stepping stone to a full registered census, and that's the approach that Spain took in their 2011 census, aiming to be fully registered base for the 2021. We'll cover that in webinar 5. I'll just talk briefly about some key features of register censuses. So there needs to be a population and other statistical registers. Legislation that gives statistics offices access to those registers. The legislation in itself is not sufficient. It's also important to have good working relations with the register owners. Then making accurate linkage at the individual level is important. Then up-to-date and linked registers enable statistics to be produced with high quality at low cost and for small areas and special population groups. But this register-based approach raises quite a lot of privacy issues. So there's a high need to protect the data, both internally within the NSO and in the published data. And it's also important to take the public with you on this and to have public support. Just got one slide on the importance of address registers. Address registers are critical for register-based censuses. They're one of the 3 important registers alongside the population register and the business register in the register-based censuses approach. And they're critical for linking individuals or persons to the properties that in which they live to be able to create households and families. Address registers are also often used in self-enumeration censuses for posting out of questionnaires or invitations to an online census, for tracking contact, for interviews or responses, so you know who has responded and who hasn't, so that you can target a field force. And the address register needs to relate to a physical address and not just a post office box. And address registers are often built by the National Statistics Office using postal and administrative data, plus geo-referencing properties during the census operational period, as was done in Spain and India. And the Stats Canada, for instance, has a statistical address register that it uses for its census purposes. You're probably aware of this already, but admin data is used and can be used within the traditional census systems. So the annual updating of the census population using admin data on births, deaths is important, and then internal and external migration. So using the cohort component method. Births and deaths are ideally sourced from civil registration systems. Some National Statistics Offices are developing methods for annual population estimates using individual level admin data. So that's a direct measure of the population that's independent of the census base. And I think when the UK talk in webinar 5, we'll hear about how they're approaching that at the moment and some of the issues that they're facing. So in conclusion, there's a variety of methods for carrying out censuses. There's a lot of regional variation in the methods used, and registers are particularly common in the European area. There's greater use of registers and admin data to supplement and replace the field force enumeration. You can use admin data and benefit from it without having to go all the way to register-based censuses, and we'll provide more information on alternative methods in later webinars. Oops, go backwards. So I finished there. Thank you for your time. I hope you managed to follow that. And those that didn't have the presentation at the beginning, I hope you were able to catch up. There's opportunity for questions and answers now. And how do I stop sharing?
Thank you, Ian. I think we have a few minutes for Q&A, so please feel free to raise any questions or comments, and we will be able to take them now. Any questions or comments? If not, I think what we can do is that we can move on to the next presentation, and we can have a bit more time at the end of the session to address any questions. So I think that's probably the way we will go. We will take the presentation from UNECE.
With the presentation issues, we overran slightly there, so I think we're on time at the moment.
All right.
We're handing over to Meryem.
All right, so we'll hand over to UNSD, to Meryem, to make her presentation. Meryem, please.
Hello, everyone. Good morning to Pacific region, and I think this evening already in our part. Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting us to this really important event. So let me share my presentation first. Yes, I think that's the one. So can you see?
Yes, Meryem, it's visible.
Okay, perfect. Let me introduce myself.
It will be better if you put it on the presentation mode.
Okay, you're right. Thank you for reminding. Yes. Okay. Yes, right? Okay. Okay, so let me introduce myself. I'm working for UN Statistics Division as an Interregional Adviser since 2013. Before UNSD, I was working for Turkish Statistical Institute for about 20 years. And my main responsibility is to contribute the implementation of 2020 World Census program. I'm basically participating in the organizations of the regional and in-house training workshops, and also provide direct support to countries in designing and planning their population housing census for this round. and also I'm contributing the revisions of the international guidelines that I will briefly explain soon, and also produce the new guidelines. Okay, so in my presentation, I will cover two topics. First, I will briefly talk about the UN methodological framework on population housing censuses, and then I will give a kind of summary information for the mid-decade assessment of census approaches. This is the survey that we recently conducted. And also, Gloria suggested that maybe I should cover also the very hot topic now, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on census activities. Okay, so probably you all know that UNSD is implementing World Population Housing Census program for over 6 decades. And now we are implementing the round, which includes the period 2015 and 2024. There's always is the process, economic commission, economic and social council approved our program in 2015, and then we started the implementation of our program. But I would like to just emphasize the 3 points that this program emphasizes, that each countries should conduct at least one census in this round, according to the international and regional recommendations. And also this program emphasizes the need for setting quality standards for reliable and accurate results. We had really the long discussions many times on the how to evaluate the quality of census results in the last round. So we observed that there is a lack of maybe interest or maybe capacity to evaluate the quality of the census results. So this round we would like to give a priority to this topic also. And also this new program emphasized the importance of the census for monitoring SDG indicators. Okay, now this is our methodological framework for this round, 2020 round of censuses. So we have the principle and recommendations for population housing census actually for all 6 decades. We have the main guidelines. This guidelines provides the basic principles and recommendations for census methodologies and also for the topics, population housing census topics that we suggest to include in each population housing census. And also we have another the important guidelines to help the census managers to plan and design and implement their censuses, manage their censuses. You will find, I'm sure, very useful this document if you are still in the beginning of the census preparation. It provides really very good guidance on how to design each process of census planning, mapping, the questionnaire design, data collection, data processing, and dissemination. The guidelines that you see in this slide is each one actually focuses on a specific topic or specific phase of census. The first one is the technical report on post-enumeration survey, which was produced almost 10 years ago, but is still valid. So we thought that we don't need to revise this guideline for this round. And the second one, we have a handbook on geographical information system in support of the census activities. This is still under review, but we see that there are a lot of really changes in this, the technology use, and also producing the georeference census data is really relatively new issue. So we are still working on this handbook, how we can incorporate all the recent changes in this revised document. We have new handbook on measuring international migration through censuses, if you are really the migration expert especially, you will find this very useful. It talks about the how to formulate the census questions, provide some suggestions, also recommendations, also provides all the definitions related to the migration, the statistical measurements, and also provides also some kind of analytical the discussions on how to, even we have an appendix on how to estimate the net international migration using the census results. So I believe you will find really very useful. Also the guideline on the use of registers and administrative data for population housing censuses, which was produced by Economic Commission for Europe, but we think that this is also, we also include this in our framework to really highlight that this is one of the international documents that country can use if they are planning to use registers in their censuses. We produced new guidelines recently on the use of electronic data collection technologies in population housing censuses. Especially this guideline provides the really extensive discussions how to adapt, compete the tablets and also internet in the census for data collection purposes, and also talks about how it affects the design of census process, because it should be designed, if you are planning to use the tablets or internet for data collection, it should be designed really differently. So this guideline explains how you can step-by-step design the whole process, including also the discussions on the multiple data collection approaches. So if countries would like to use more than one technology to collect the data, so there are also should be some the steps to incorporate all the data. Also, there are some concerns for the mod effects. So you will find really very detailed discussions in the document. So maybe I shouldn't. I am really using maybe a lot of time to describe the methodological framework, but I believe really it's important. So we revised recently the handbook on editing, which particularly shows how to edit census data during data collection. So what are the editing rules that we have to apply during data collection? In that sense, is completely new. I mean, that part on editing procedures for electronic data collection is really new in this handbook. We have another handbook on measuring economic activity, which was produced 10 years ago. We don't have enough funds really to revise this handbook, but we produce an e-learning courses on population housing census. So one model focused on only economic activity, which was actually prepared in collaboration with ILO. So last, the guidelines that I want to talk about is the steel draft. I saw Alexandra from ECLAC. We recently actually organized regional workshops with ECLAC for introducing this guideline also for their VDATAM, the database. So this is the new report on measuring SDG indicators through population housing census and CRES data. So we are discussing actually about 40 indicators that can be directly measured from census data. And of course, it's important to mention maybe that not only direct measuring this indicator, but it's more importantly that census can provide a very the extent of disaggregation, data disaggregation by not only by geographical level, but also a wide range of topics. Okay, so now the second topic that I want to cover in my presentation, we conducted the survey for is we call mid-round survey on the implementation of 2020 round of censuses. So this was carried out about a year ago in July and September 2019, and we only asked 11 questions in total, and also we received really very good response from countries. 158 countries replied our questionnaire, our survey questionnaire. So now this is some key results from the survey. We collect the data, of course, that what are the main census methods for each country. So maybe I should mention that this question raised for collecting data on the 2020 round of censuses. So at the time of that we sent the questionnaire, some countries were already they conducted their census, but most of them were still working on preparatory activities probably. So this results reflects that the countries, whether countries use certain methods or planning to use those methods. So please, these results probably will be different when we conduct our survey at the end of the round. So according to our results, out of these 158 countries, 70% of the countries declared that they will use traditional census. It's of course worldwide. About the 30% of the countries declared that they will use administrative registers for conducting the census. But it differs, of course. It's the world, as Jan presented, the European countries have a completely different experience, but this is also to show you worldwide how the new approach now, the use of registers are really becoming important for countries, and there's a significant the attempt to change the census methodology. According to these results, as I said, 30% of the countries would like to use the registers, but with the different approaches. So only 10% of the countries, basically, they are in Europe, and also I think a few countries, small countries in other regions. But there's only 10% of the countries rely on fully registers to compile the census information. But others, like the 20% of the countries, which is about the 29 countries in the world, they are planning, or they already conducted, planning to use combined census with full field enumeration or sample survey. I want to take your attention in the bar that shows combined census with full field enumeration. So it's quite actually big compared to the other approaches which use also the registers. Let me also show you how the figures changes across the regions. As you can see that the Europe is also out of 12 countries that they are going to conduct the full register surveys, 12 of them European countries, surprisingly, of course. And also, but in Asia, we can see that that out of 36 countries, we have about 11 countries that they are planning to conduct census with registers, with the use of registers, and 5 of them will use registers with full field enumeration. If we look at the Pacific region, Ocean region, actually maybe I should say that we have quite low response rate from Pacific region. So it's only 12 countries responded our survey. Probably next time we should also work with you to improve our response rate. So out of 11 countries that they responded our questionnaire, only 2 countries are planning to use registers, but with full field enumeration. Let me say a few words about the combined census methodology, particularly with full field enumeration. So this approach, as Jan mentioned also, that this approach is basically adopted in the transition from traditional to register-based census. Especially the registers with full-field enumeration, we can see from countries that some countries really, they use this approach as a first step to transit, to change their census methodology from traditional to the register-based census. So maybe I should also emphasize that this requires, of course, a long-term project. It's not like a traditional census, one project or one census. So it should be a really long-term project. After the census, the operation, there should be also follow-up activities to improve, to update the administrative registers, population register or address register, address databases. Those kind of things, the steps should be included in the project, and also the collaboration with stakeholders on really very important steps, and it should be also part of the important project. Okay, probably maybe next webinar seminar we can more talk about the approach feature. I want to also say a few words about why countries use full-field enumeration with registers, because they want to improve the accuracy of population counts. Most of the time, population registers are not accurate. They are missing some people, or they are not accurate in terms of the vital events. So the full-field enumeration provide opportunity to improve the coverage and also linking the population with the address that they live. So that could be probably the main reason why countries want to use full-field enumeration with registers. And also the combined methods provides opportunity to check and update and improve the quality of census data derived from administrative sources. So not all the information, particularly related to the characteristics of the people, may not be really correct in the system. So this will provide also opportunity to improve the quality of the census data. And also the combined approach, provide information for census variables that are not reliable or not available in the administrative data. So the administrative registers may have this topic, but may not be reliable, and maybe there's no way to use this data for census purpose. So the combined census methodology also used to collect this information. Combined census also conducted to create a linking frame to bring together the different sources. And at minimum, the two identifiers are important: person ID and dwelling ID, to link this each other. And also, recently we observed that the housing ID also makes use of address code, and which may contain also the special coordinates. Okay, the survey also, we collected data on the information on the population base that the countries collected data. So as you know that the mainly two concepts for population count: population present count and usual count, and also some countries collect data for both concepts. We can see that most countries actually collect data for usual residents, and also if we look at the Pacific region, we see that most countries actually conduct the census, conduct the de facto census, which actually collects the present population. This might be an important point if the countries would like to move to use registers. So usually the population registers register the people according to their place of residence. Therefore, if countries conduct the de facto census, and if they're planning to use register, this is the one issue that they have to consider. really to see the possibility of comparing this new census with the previous censuses. One of the information that we collected in the census is the use of technology. So you can see that there is a significant differences now compared to the 2010 round. Now almost 70% of the countries, they want to use the tablets for data collection. It's all electronic data collection. This is, you will see that actually the countries the opportunity to pick the modes of data collection if they are planning to use multi-mode data collection. So in that sense, you will see that percentage is not the 100%. When we add the percentage, it shows that the significant number of countries are planning to use multi-mode data collection for this round. Particularly if they are using face-to-face interview, copy might be the main mode, but there might be some areas, remote areas that they cannot use copy, so they use paper questionnaire. And also for self-response, you can see that the more than 30% of the countries already use or planning to use internet self-response. It's the 50 countries now. And also there is an attempt also...
Sorry, Meryem, I will request you to please move a little faster.
Move quickly. Okay, sorry for taking time. Yeah, okay. So this is also the regional differences. I can show you the Pacific region. We have a quite number of countries that they want to use modern technology. Yeah. Okay, and also we found that almost 70% of the countries they already maybe collected the location information for building, or they're planning. So it's really very important the development that about maybe 100 countries this round will collect the geographic coordinates at the building level. And this is also for the Asian countries, is really out of 11 countries, 8 countries are collected or will collect the geographic coordinates at the building level. Okay, I think I can skip this. So briefly, the results of the COVID-19 pandemic, I will talk about the 2 different surveys. One is a more global survey conducted in collaboration with World Bank, UNECE, and this is a UNECE and World Bank global survey. And according to this survey, it was just 2 months ago. This first round was conducted. Now, currently, the second round is carried out. I mean, we will receive the data in a couple of weeks. Okay. According to this survey, about the 61 countries, 61 countries are planning to, whether they are in the field, they were in the field before the shutdown, of course, or they are planning to conduct the field work this year. So the 60% of them declared that they had to postpone or cancel their preparatory activities. Only the 10% of them, they said that they completed their census preparatory activities before the arrival of COVID-19. The other, also the 30%, we say that they will produce, but most of them actually, they are using the administrative register for censuses. So the countries that they are planning to census this year, they declared that they postponed their censuses either later this year or next year. So this also may be quite the important implication on the census results, the timeliness of census results. Okay, this slide shows the key challenges in conducting population health census. So the countries that responded to the survey, 70% mentioned that they need to reduce face-to-face interaction. And the other half, they mentioned that they have a problem with transportation and mobility restriction, and also 40% of the countries fund that they have whether they have their census fund was cut by the government, or they have a funding limitation. So another survey that UNSD is currently conducted is actually website. So we asked 3 questions to countries that they are planning to conduct census this year, and also collected information. Here is there is a link, so you can go to that link and find the information for 43 countries all over the world. And this shows that really if countries use registers, they are less affected. Only if they have some the activities with their stakeholders, this could be affected. But normally, most of them probably will conduct their census as they planned, without any significant postpone in their censuses. But if they are using the traditional combined census, it's really they have to reschedule and suspend their field enumeration. They mentioned that there's some, we ask also what kind of actions they want to use to reduce the impact of a pandemic. They mentioned that they are extending the duration of interview, either with paper or internet, or they want to maximize the use of telephone interview, or replace the tablet-based face-to-face interview with paper-based self-interview. And also they talk about that there could be additional costs associated with the purchase of disinfectants or mask for field staff. Thank you very much. Sorry for taking a long time. Okay, yes, yeah.
Thank you, Meryem. We'll take questions and answers. Any questions and answers? Any questions? Sorry, not answers. Any questions from Meryem's presentation or comments? All right. Okay, then we will now move to the last session, the last presentation of the day, and that is from UNECE.
Hello, I'm Stephen Bale from the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. I'm sorry I can't be with you at the moment. Unfortunately, it's the middle of the night in Geneva, so please make do with this recorded presentation. So I'll just share my screen and start the presentation. So I'm going to talk to you today about opportunities to increase the use of administrative data during the COVID-19 crisis. First, by way of introduction, my organization, United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, or UNECE, is one of 5 United Nations regional commissions. You may be more familiar with the work of our sister organization, UNECE, based in Bangkok. Well, we're based in Switzerland, in the lovely city of Geneva, and within UNECE, we have a statistical division of 28 staff. Our work is mostly facilitating country activities through expert meetings, developing guidelines and recommendations, and capacity development work with countries that need a bit more support. So as I said earlier, my name is Stephen Bale. I'm a senior statistician and I'm the regional advisor in statistics in UNECE. I've worked in official statistics for around 29 years, including time in United Nations, Eurostat, the Statistical Office of the European Union, the OECD, and also the UK Office for National Statistics. Now I'm going to be showing a few examples of how different countries have used the power of administrative data to good effect during the COVID-19 crisis. And my first example comes from Ireland. Here, the Irish Central Statistical Office and their mapping agency, Ordnance Survey Ireland, created already 2 years ago a joint data hub, something called GeoHive. And they developed this first for measuring and monitoring progress towards the SDGs in Ireland. So it's their national reporting platform for SDGs. And they've also developed versions looking at specific issues like gender statistics. So they had already in place a good collaboration. And then along came the COVID-19. So they were able to quickly repurpose that collaboration to use the tools that they developed, the GeoHive system, to bring together statistical and geospatial information, but also to bring in some administrative data, and particularly data on health through the Health Ministry of Ireland. In this way, they were able to create a dashboard and to be able to create reports and analysis to support the National Pandemic Modelling Team in their work to manage the spread of the virus. My second example concerns Mexico, and in many ways it's quite a similar example, but here the National Statistical Office and the National Mapping Agency are actually the same institute, so they're merged in the same organization, which made partnerships a little bit easier. But also they developed dashboards and tools, maps, to show the impact of coronavirus in different parts of the country. And here on the screen is an example. Now, they were also using administrative data so that they could show the location of, for example, hospitals, pharmacies, and other public service organizations. So in those two examples, there are some common themes. First is that both countries were able to respond very quickly, and they were able to do this by building on existing partnerships. So they already had in place partnership agreements with administrative data suppliers, and in both cases also with the National Mapping Agency. Both countries have quite forward-looking statistical legislation that allows access to data. And this is very important in a crisis situation, because if you have the legislation in place, it's much easier to get the data. The other thing that both countries had done over the last 10 years or so was to modernize their national statistical systems. And they've done that in partnership with UNECE and many other countries under our high-level group for the modernization of official statistics. And this modernization has taken the form of standardization. So standardizing data management and analysis tools and systems, and also standardizing data flows within the organization. And doing this in a way that everything they develop is designed not just for one specific purpose, but for reuse multiple times. And because both countries had such systems in place, it was very quick and very easy to repurpose them. Another common theme across these examples is the importance of data integration. So be able to integrate, to bring together data from multiple sources, data from surveys, from administrative sources, and geospatial information, and even potentially also sources like big data. Both examples also highlighted the importance of a dashboard type presentation, and this makes it very easy for non-statisticians to easily see the pictures and the trends in the data. And of course, another common theme was the importance of geospatial information. And this is a priority for us at the moment in UNECE. We're trying to build links between the statistical and the geospatial communities, because we both have information assets that, if combined, could be much more powerful. So on this slide, I have a very simple model, which is actually based on something I heard from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, that they're trying to put geospatial information at the heart of their data model so that they can use it to integrate data on people, property, jobs and businesses much more easily. And this is from the very basic idea that everything happens somewhere. Everything has a geospatial location. And if we have that geospatial location, if we capture it as a variable in our statistical surveys, in our databases, in our registers, then it's much easier to integrate information based on geography. Here's a third good practice example. This is actually from before the COVID crisis, but only just before. And this is where a relatively small statistical office, in this case in Georgia, with very, very limited resources, was able to use some free and open source tools like OpenStreetMap and a GIS package called QGIS, together with geocoding all of their units in their statistical business register. And they've been able to then produce maps showing location of employment, businesses, etc. And you can see that something like this could also be quite quickly repurposed to show impact of COVID-19, for example, on the economy. So I want to come towards the end of this presentation just by highlighting a few UNECE resources. So although we're right on the other side of the world in Europe, the resources that we develop in partnership with our member countries are free and open to everybody. So they're all available on our website, on our wiki platform, etc. And I'll start with talking about resources specifically in the area of administrative data. So firstly, we have a wiki site called ASSIST, Administrative and Secondary Sources in Statistics. And this is where we have a collection of publications, of training materials, etc., all showing how statistical organizations have been able to make use of administrative data. We also, of course, have links to newer data sources like big data and links to a project on data integration from a couple of years ago. One of the main resources on this site is our guide to using administrative and secondary sources for official statistics. And this was written a few years ago as an outcome of a series of training courses. So it sets out in relatively basic terms how to get started using administrative data in official statistics. And here are a few of our other publications that might also be of interest. Just at the start of the COVID crisis, our brand new recommendations on the role of official statistics in measuring hazardous events and disasters was released. So it was really good timing, not planned at all. But this publication is looking at how official statistics can respond quickly in disaster situations. And this also includes, of course, the importance of using different data sources, of having access, having good legislation, having partnerships in place. The two other publications on this slide are our publications related to statistical legislation. So a generic law on official statistics and guidance on modernizing statistical legislation. These have both been released in the last few years and give advice and ideas on how statistical legislation can be updated to make it easier to work in the new information age, and particularly to get access and use of other data sources. Finally, I mentioned the importance of standardization, And here are a few of our resources related to standardization and modernization within statistical production. So top, I guess, is probably familiar to at least some of you, something called the generic statistical business process model, which is all about describing and defining statistical production in a standardized way. To the right is the companion model, the GSIM, the generic statistical information model, which tries to describe in a standard way the information flows through the statistical business process. And then pulling those models and others together is something called the Common Statistical Production Architecture, which is all about designing statistical production in a modular way with reusable components. At the bottom of this slide and many of the previous slides, you have a link for further information. So that is the end of my presentation. I understand that the organisers will be collecting any questions you might have, and they will send them to me for a written response. But I also include my email address on this slide in case any of you want to contact me directly. And I believe the organisers will make the slides with all of the links available to you afterwards.
Thanks, everyone. That brings us to the end of our presentations today. And again, I'll call out for any questions or comments. If not, we will move on to the closing remarks for this session. We thank you for participating. We would like to request for your thoughts through a short survey about this first webinar. Our interest is to model this to make them as useful as possible to your countries and to your offices. So we request that you please share with us your thoughts about what we did today and what worked well and what did not for you. We will have the next webinar on the 12th of August, and here we will dive straight into register-based approaches and what role registers can play in meeting the requirements of a population and housing census. We will have Statistics Netherlands presenting to us in person, and we will also hear a bit about NSDSs from Paris 21, and then also continue with a synthesis of key insights and lessons on the adoption of register-based approaches for census outputs. We have a web page that we have dedicated to the resources of this event, and we will share the link to that page with you. So please keep referring to the page for all the resources that are that come from this event. I think with that, I would like to thank you very much for taking your time to join us, and please feel free to share any questions and comments that you have even following the session. Michael, you have something to say? So that is all from us on this side. Thank you very much for joining us.